Okay, we're ready to get started. Right in here. And here are the seats to the left. It is 265 feet long and 10 feet high. The artist was a gentleman by the name of Heinz, in the German army and forces served in World War II. He was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge while lying in the snow bleeding. Heinz realized war does not solve humanity's problems, and he see the big picture. And then after the tour, you will have the opportunity to go up close and look at all the details. Christians were people who sought to live by Christ's teaching, seeing themselves as pilgrims and strangers here on earth. And they truly were, as they were liable to be persecuted anywhere they went. This came to an abrupt change in the year 312, when the Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. And we have to remember that at this time, Rome ruled most of Europe and parts of Africa and Asia. A later emperor by the name of Theodosius in 380 decided to make Christianity the state religion, meaning everyone living within the Roman Empire would have to be a member of the Christian church. Now that might sound great in theory, but does not work in reality. In order to make sure everyone was a member of the church, they baptized them as infants before they had a voice in the matter. And almost overnight, the persecuted became the persecutor of those who disagreed. But there were still those living outside organized Christendom who simply sought to live by Christ's teachings. People like Valdez, a wealthy merchant in Lyon, France, who late in the 12th century became convicted of the radical following of Jesus Christ. He sold everything he owned, using the money to help poor people. His followers sought to live the way they felt God wanted them to live, and they were called Valdensians because of Valdez. They were threatened, they were persecuted all throughout Europe, including the 40 we have here being burned at the stake in one day in Lyon. The printing press was definitely one of the greatest inventions of all time. Before this, most people could not read, which wasn't a big deal because they didn't have anything to read anyway. But when John Gutenberg and others perfected movable type in about 1440, it enabled them to print not only books and Bibles, which were still way too expensive for the common people, but they printed many small flyers, both religious and secular, and soon millions of these little bulletins were circulating throughout Europe. John Tetzel was selling indulgences to raise money for the Roman Catholic Church. This piece of paper is called an indulgence, and in the minds of many of our ancestors, he did give us something we treasure to this day when he translated the Bible into the German language, a revised edition of which is still used among the Amish. Ulrich Zwingli was a minister in Zurich, Switzerland. He was very enamored with Luther's teachings, inviting a friend, Conrad Grebel, to help him translate the Bible into German. Conrad Grebel brought two of his fellow scholars along, Felix Manz and George Blaurock, and these three, along with others, started studying the scriptures, first with Zwingli and then alone after Zwingli disowned them. And it happened just like it does every time people open the Bible, start studying it, and applying their lives to what they learn. Their lives became transformed, and they realized they had a completely different vision of a church from Luther, Zwingli, and the rest of the state churches. Instead of a church being comprised of everyone in a certain area, in their vision, it would only be made up of people willing to forsake all to follow Christ. Because of this, they refused having their babies baptized, because in their vision, baptism and church membership would only belong to voluntary adult believers. This was a threat to the state church because without infant baptism, you didn't have a state church. So these three were given orders to appear in front of the town council. Here we have the three, Felix Manz, Conrad Grebel, and George Blaurock. Opposing them was Zwingli. The judges were the town council, who were Zwingli's employers. Guess who won that debate? Zwingli, of course, did, and these three, along with their followers, were given orders to immediately have their children baptized and quit talking against infant baptism. It was the very next evening of January the 21st, 1525. They had gathered in Felix Manz's home, trying to decide what their next move would be. When after much prayer and Bible reading, George Blaurock dropped his knees. He said to Conrad Grebel, "Baptize me." Rebaptizing. This is the only baptism we remember. And they called themselves the Swiss Brethren. But once again, this was a threat to the state church. It wasn't long until Bolt Eberly was burned at the stake, becoming the first Anabaptist martyr. The three leaders were soon dead, Conrad Grebel being the first of the three to die. When he died in exile of an illness he had gotten while in prison for his faith. Felix Manz was tied in this position and drowned in the river in Zurich on orders from his friend and teacher, Ulrich Zwingli. They were not allowed to kill George Blaurock because he was not a citizen of Zurich, so they beat him, chased him in the countryside where he baptized hundreds before he too was burned at the stake in the Tyrol. The three leaders were dead, but the faith kept on spreading. As you can see by the vivid colors the artists used, the next few years were violent years. This small group that had rebaptized each other grew so fast, despite the fierce persecution, that within the next 5 years there were more than 2,000 martyrs. 2,000 people willingly went to their deaths rather than compromising their walk with Christ. But the more that were killed, the faster the faith spread. And one reason was when they were persecuted in one town, they would flee to other towns preaching the gospel there. And that way in little villages and big cities across the face of Europe, the church grew and flourished. Does anyone have any questions on anything up to this point? Yes?
Why were they baptized twice?
Okay, they had been baptized as babies, but they didn't count that. So they wanted to be baptized for miles around to watch Anabaptists and other criminals being burned at the stake or beheaded. Anabaptists are usually preach at their own executions, and other people became converted. So when Michael Sattler, one of the leading Anabaptists in the Schleidenheim, Germany area, was arrested, the authorities stepped up the game. Before executing him, they cut out his tongue, so he could not witness to the people. Then they took these red-hot tongues, they tore flesh out of his body at 7 different places. Before burning him to death, and a few days later drowning his wife. And they were only 2 of thousands who suffered horrendously for the name of Christ, and because they were not members of the state church, be that Protestant or Catholic, depending where they lived. In an atmosphere like that, it's not surprising people came on the scene like Balthasar Hubmaier. In 1527 in Nikolsburg, Moravia, today part of the Czech Republic, Balthasar Hubmaier said, "I am sick and tired of being treated like a dog. I'm going to take the sword and defend myself." Hans Hut said, "No, that is not what Christ taught." He said, "I will merely carry a staff in case of wild animals." The two parted ways. Hubmaier's sword did not do him any good, as he died a martyr's death and his church died soon thereafter. Hans Hut also died a martyr's death, but his church kept growing after his death because it was based on something greater than him. Shortly after Hans Hut's death, his followers came together outside Nikolsburg. They decided to put all their possessions together. They would no longer have private property, but everything would be owned by the community. They were soon joined by a flamboyant young gentleman by the name of Jacob Hutter, who became their leader before he too was burned at the stake. But his followers carry his name today, as they are known as Hutterites. There are thousands of Hutterites on the western prairies, especially Canadian provinces. The Hutterites have the same beliefs Amish and Mennonites do, except they are the only Anabaptist group that does not have private property. Was going to return to earth in November of 1853, and he wanted to be ready to meet him, so he dressed in white every day, and then he built this chair for Jesus to sit in, making it larger than other chairs because Jonas said Jesus should sit higher than other people. Now, the one thing I never did figure out was if Jonas really thought Jesus was going to return to earth, why did he think he would do so in Walnut Creek, Ohio? Although we do realize Holmes County is the center of the universe, everything else is outside of there, so you know. The 1850s, we had the Crimean War, Crimea being a peninsula of Ukraine where there were Mennonites living. Some of these Mennonites are forced to serve in non-combatant roles. That's the war you might have read of Florence Nightingale taking care of a lot of wounded. What you probably did not read about was the Mennonites taking care of thousands of wounded. And the reason you didn't read about it was because they took care of the losing side's wounded, and the winners write the history books. But nevertheless, the Mennonites realized their time of freedom was coming to end in Russia. This was the time the railroads were opening the American West, and a group of Hutterites had recently migrated to North America. More than 700 Mennonite families made the move from Ukraine to Kansas, bringing along turkey red winter wheat, and soon the Great Plains were known as America's breadbasket. Before that, they were known as the Great American Desert. And that's the wheat still raised throughout most of North America today. So let's move around one last time. For the conscientious objector. Hines going to be used a lot of different examples here. He chose to use the Huffer boys. There were actually 4 of them. 3 brothers and a brother-in-law, because they refused to serve the armed forces. They were sentenced to Alcatraz prison where they were hung for 36 straight hours by their wrists just so their toes would touch the floor. At this chamber pot, they would take turns standing on to ease some of the pain. From there, they were transferred to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where they were forced to run through the rain from the train depot to the army camp. 2 of them died of the exposure. But we are thankful when we come over here to World War II. It's like looking out through a window because the American government has been kind enough to provide the conscientious objector with alternative forms of service. We appreciate this and hope we do not abuse the privilege. World War I was also the time of the Russian Revolution, which occurred when the Russian people overthrew the Tsarist government. The Soviet Union was established. There were still a lot of Mennonites in Russia. Many were killed during this time. Others forced out of their homesteads. The American Mennonites heard their plight, sending shipments of food to keep them from starving. These shipments were the beginning of what is today known as the MCC, or the Mennonite Central Committee, which along with Christian Aid Ministries still sends aid to needy areas across the globe. Peter Dick was a 5-year-old boy on the point of starvation when that first shipment arrived. He never forgot what the American people had done for him. Clayton Kratz went with that first shipment. He was captured by the Red Army. We have not heard of him since. After World War II, there were many Mennonite war refugees throughout Eastern Europe. A young couple by the name of Peter and Elfrida Dick heard their plight. This, of course, being the same Peter Dick we met back here. And Peter remembered what the American people had done for him when he was in need. And so they chartered the ship Wollendam and brought over 5,000 Mennonites to new homes in South America. As you drive through the local countryside, you will see the various symbols of Amish. Consolidating, many of the Amish felt this was inconsistent with their way of life, and they started some of their own schools. Several Amish fathers went to jail because they refused to send their children to public school. But in 1972, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Amish had the right to their own schools, and that we also had the right to only go 8 grades. The Chief Justice made a very important comment when he said just because a group of people are different does not mean they are wrong. And we want to remember that not just for us, but for someone else who might be different. An argument our opponents used was they said if an Amish child went through the Amish 8 grades, later chose to leave and further their education, they would not be able to do so. That has been proven wrong. Today there are doctors, lawyers, other professionals who grew up Amish, chose to leave and further their education, were well able to do so. More importantly to me, there are many staying Amish, being successful in many different fields. The reason this is all possible is because although we don't teach a lot of different subjects, when we teach fairly well. We don't teach a lot of social studies. We teach the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And because Amish don't have radios or TVs, a lot of Amish kids are bookworms. And if you can read, you can become anything you want to. The Mennonites chose an alternative route, building their own colleges to educate their own youth, which has worked to various degrees. Here we have the three main groups of historical Anabaptists in their worship services. We talked about the various symbols of the Amish life. The Hutterites have the same beliefs Amish and Mennonites do, except, again, the Hutterites are the only Anabaptist group that does not have private property. Everything is owned by the church community. The Mennonites are a very diverse group of people, as they range from the old order Mennonites who still drive horse and buggy to the Mennonite Church USA, which is a very progressive denomination. But despite all the diversity among the many different Anabaptist groups, there are two teachings very prevalent among all Anabaptists. The first one being non-resistance at all times, in all forms. Again, we're human. We don't always get that accomplished, or that is our goal. The second one is what we would call in German Kinderzucht, or the teaching of the child. Because we feel children are a gift of God, it's our duty to teach them they may fall on our way. And that is why the last picture is a picture of children from all across the globe, because children and young people are truly a very important part of the Anabaptist picture. They are our church of today, our hope for the future. And it is our desire that everyone may get to know the Lord Jesus Christ.
Just as quickly, they started the United States, the first came back to Pennsylvania. A lot of artwork here, though. Last time they gave us a tour through some other areas here too, but I guess it's being the day before Thanksgiving. We're not going to get that today. Yeah.
डेकोर का है, होम डेकोर की शॉप है।
बगे आइसक्रीम जो छोड़ो पिज़्ज़ा ना इनके पाँच बकी ना चीनी जो ऑर्डर में पहले बकी से पहले हम बकी से आ जाएं फिर पिज़्ज़ा ले लें। पापा ने कॉल किया, कोई रिसीव नहीं करा। अच्छा अब यहाँ पे हम मुझे इनकी लोकेशन ही कुछ इतनी अजीब सी लग रही है कि इसमें कोई सफाई का मुझे लगता नहीं है। कोई ऐसी चेन हो ना तो समझ आता है बेटा, चेन फिर भी कुछ इतना कुछ फिर भी आपको लगता है कि यहाँ मुझे कोई इतना कोई खास अट्रैक्ट नहीं लगा। छोटे हैं मगर देख 2 मिनट और वॉक करते हैं वरना यहाँ से ले लेते हैं। पहले थोड़ा देख तो लें हम इन चीज़ों को। मेरे ख्याल से यहाँ पे वैसे ही है साइड जैसे डाउन होता है, ठीक है ना, वैसा ही बसा हुआ है। ये अच्छा है, देखो बेटा वो कितना अच्छा व्यू नजर आ रहा है वहाँ से। डाउन हिल है और बहुत ज़बरदस्त, यहाँ पे डाउन हिल है और बहुत ज़बरदस्त है। बस ये कि ये देखो
एस्केप रूम में जा सकते हैं।
आस्क योर फादर। देखते हैं, पापा से पूछो। पापा ये भी एक आइसक्रीम की दुकान है, ठीक है, आइसक्रीम पार्लर। पॉपकॉर्न है, अच्छा ही 60 फ्लेवर्स ऑफ पॉपकॉर्न। ठीक, 60 फ्लेवर बल्कि 50 फ्लेवर आइसक्रीम के हैं। अच्छा यहाँ पे जेम्स वगैरह भी हैं फ्रेश। पॉपकॉर्न के 60 फ्लेवर हैं। आइसक्रीम के 50 फ्लेवर हैं। अच्छा यहाँ डिफरेंट आइसक्रीम का भी 50 फ्लेवर हैं। इधर सामने प्राइस लिखी है ना, कैपुचिनो 250। अच्छा यहाँ पे आइसक्रीम्स के हैं फ्लेवर, नीट एंड क्लीन है।